So, welcome to this episode of Rule Breakers. Um, I'm delighted to have as my guest today Tom Bruce, who has done so many things in his career that I think it's best if I let Tom speak to them. But suffice it to say that he is a Renaissance man who's done everything from working on in the world of law to doing lighting systems for theater groups. And somewhere in the midst of all of that stuff, he found time to write a web browser or two back in the day. So it's wonderful to have a chance to talk to you, Tom.
Well, thank you. So let's see. Um, I was an undergraduate at Yale. I was the master electrician for the Yale Rep for 2 years. I was admitted to the drama school in 1977. I actually taught two courses in PL1, a considerably outdated programming
Wow.
language.
Okay.
Many, many years later, the guy who co-authored the textbook that I used to teach PL1 at Yale, he was actually up at Cornell at that point, and we were in some conference, basically about computer systems at Yale, and I said, David, I actually taught from your textbook when I was at Yale, and he said to me, "Well, why would a bunch of actors need to know about PL1?" And I just realized it was hopeless, and I just said, "David, that's the way things were there."
Wow.
Right after I got out of the drama school, I did this job for AT&T. We were implementing call waiting and call forwarding, and I think I must have done that in assembler.
Hmm.
But I also knew COBOL enough to know that most of the claims being made by the United States government about people being 150 years old and still receiving Social Security benefits were way off base because basically, if they don't know the date of birth, they set it to 0, right? Which is
Zero. Sure.
yeah, which is nuts. Anyway, what would you actually like to know about my career at the law school?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting segue from obviously somewhere along the line you picked up programming sufficient for you to be able to program in PL1, which was a high level programming language,
Yeah.
assembly language, which is a low level one. You clearly have done some COBOL as well. While you were doing this, career in electrical and in stage work.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting jump to get from there to a legal information institute in Cornell. How did that come about?
My first job at Cornell was as a computer maintenance guy. And then in 1992, Peter Martin and I co-founded the Legal Information Institute. Uh, he pulled out, I think, in 1994, leaving me as the sole director. And I just sort of went on from there.
Mhm.
It's I actually don't know anything about programming in Python. Mostly when I was there, I was using Ruby
Right.
as the programming language, because as I say, I don't understand Python at all. Cello was actually written using Borland C++.
I remember it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, I think I probably told you this, but cello got its name because there was uh, a woman I knew who played the cello, and there was also a browser named Viola,
Viola. Okay.
right? Which is how I ended up titling it cello.
Right, 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 right. I remember in the very early days of the web coming across that, and that was it. But it supported multiple protocols, didn't it? So there was, I think, Gopher and various other
Yeah.
early, yeah, were in there
No,
too.
no, that's right. That's right.
And when you set up the Legal Information Institute, was that for the purposes of? I guess here's how I first came across it, and I suspect I'm not alone in this. Is that there was a period in history, where if you type in an arbitrary CF4 citation,
Uh-huh.
instead of being brought to the GovInfo as it is now, or FDSys as it used to be, in other words, an official
Right.
federal resource, um, you'd actually end up on Cornell's on your version of the CFR. Was
Yeah.
it set up with with a view to, providing easy access to the regulatory material? Was that the
Oh, yes.
driver?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. And the other thing is we ran a Supreme Court service
Mm,
for years, which has now been taken over by some people in Congress, and I just thought we should just get rid of the Supreme Court collection permanently, but others disagreed, and so how that happened. The first thing we did, uh, other than publishing the WEX, the so-called Dictionary of Legal Information, the first thing we put up was the U.S. Code,
mhm.
and then the CFR. And at this point, my successors have extended it to all of the regulations at the state level.
Okay,
Yeah, my friend Sarah Frug is now running the development
right.
squad.
And I guess knowing a little bit about these sausage machines, from the work that we do in Propulon legislatures, I have to ask a question about
Hmm.
the codification question. Is as you know, a lot of this material, there can be a lag between it being published and it being codified into a form that's easy to consume. So, are there law folks in Cornell who are contributing their expertise to do that codification work? Because the powers that be, around the states anyway, it seems very different from state to state in terms of your ability to access an up to date set of, state level regulation.
No, no, that's right. And I don't actually know at this point what the lags for the various states actually are. I could probably ask Sarah, but I really have no idea.
Right.
Uh, I think one of the best things we ever did was put together the legal dictionary called WEX, uh,
Hmm.
which basically gives short takes on a whole hell of a lot of legal topics of one sort or another.
Right. And how did you keep the lights on in the Legal Information Institute? How was it fun?
Well, we initially got a grant from NCARE, which is a national organization that provides grants, and that was what we used to start it up.
Hmm.
Um, but since then, we carry advertising for Justia, which is run by Tim Stanley, actually from Mountain View. And once we discovered that we could run advertising on the site, I mean, I think he gives the LII somewhere near $750,000 a year,
Okay.
or maybe 1,000,000, just because we're running advertising. Uh,
Right.
I think they're gradually scaling back the advertising
Mm.
because they think it's intrusive, which is correct, actually. And I'm not sure what actually is going to happen once they remove all of it. Really, really no idea.
Right. Right. I mean, it strikes me as it's really interesting. I remember, I think it was your good self posting it at some point about how, if such and such a section becomes topical, like for whatever the news cycle is, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes these individual sections of the CF4 become disproportionately important because someone said it on the news. That would cause, a major spike in access to that section on the LI.
Oh yeah. I mean that always happens. I mean, when Bush v. Gore was decided, the traffic shot up by like 1,000%.
Right, right,
I mean, it was crazy.
right.
Absolutely crazy.
And I guess, the phenomenon of bit rot. I know is very, very, very familiar to you. But I can't help wondering, what would happen, if all of the URLs right now that have been, that have been published on, just take the CF4 collection on
Hmm.
in the Cornell Legal Information Institute. How many of those have ended up finding their ways into footnotes in PowerPoint presentations, into Microsoft Word memorandas, and so on?
Oh,
And
ton of,
a ton of them.
ton,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That's one of those shaky questions, isn't it? About legal information infrastructure in the digital age is links break. You know,
yeah,
um,
yeah. Although fortunately, most of the LIIs have not. I mean, maybe a few here and there, but not very many.
it's the other thing that really intrigues me about that, the way that information gets published, is that it seems to be a sort of a byproduct of the concept of the separation of powers, right? Which has all sorts of great benefits, right? No, no,
Oh,
no,
sure,
no, no, no disputing the philosophical intent behind the separation of powers, but it does bring with it this idea that, if the law is a combination of, you know, the case law interpretations, the regulations adding the meat on the bones of the primary law coming from Congress, let's just take the federal level, um, you do end up with this, siloed information um, thing that arguably
yeah,
there are there are three entities arguably responsible each for producing one leg of this three-legged stool.
right, right.
Sure. I don't know how best to reconcile that, because it seems it's the last thing you'd want would be to have a single entity that's producing all of that, and because it would be completely contrary to the intent of the separation of powers. But at the same time, it does create that problem of providing easy access to anyone who wants to consume the material, given that you, at any given point in a piece of legal research, you would arguably need to traverse between the three.
Sure, sure.
There's just no good answer to it, really, is there?
No, not really.
And what do you think is? I suspect that I know that you're now have moved into the musician part of yours. I understand it. Let's talk about that in a minute. But uh, I suspect one of the things that's now a head scratcher for a lot of the legal information institutes around the world, as well as every other publisher, is that what happens now as all the AIs come scraping all of this stuff. Have you got any
That's
opinion on that, or have you decided to leave all of that behind you?
well, I have to admit that I don't understand AI very well. I have a manual that will teach me how to use it, which I think would actually be pretty good. Actually, though, I did use. We're taking a. My wife and I are taking a trip down to Charleston and then back to the Washington D.C. area, and I actually used Chat GPT to find a hotel in Washington that was equidistant from every place we were going to go,
Hmm.
which was sort of fun.
Well,
And now I'm just waiting for the various people we're going to visit to get back to me with what dates they're available.
right, 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 right. It does look as if that itinerary planning thing is one of the big examples that's being held up for this, agentic AI revolution. Kind
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Yeah, well, like I say, I don't understand AI very well. Sarah Frug, who is now running the LII tech shop, uses it to uses ChatGPT to generate fundraising letters.
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Get
um,
that.
she has to tweak the drafts a little bit, but
Sure, sure. There have been some interesting cases. I don't know if you've seen them, but um, I think the legal community have been very quick to adopt it, perhaps too quick to adopt it.
I think you're probably right about it being too quick.
Hmm. Because it can with supreme confidence invent Supreme Court opinions.
Yeah, I know. Well, Yeah, I mean, AI hallucination is a very well understood thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The trick is finding some ways to it can be so subtle where it is, like in a very dense legal text where there's lots and lots of citations. It's just hard to dig out the ones that are just completely, invented, whereas
Mhm.
the ones that are actually really, actually point somewhere. Um, I really like that idea of having a master knowledge graph of this material, if ever we could get to that point,
Yeah,
master citation network. uh,
yeah,
of the stuff that's actually real. Now, of course, the thing can still hallucinate, what Madison versus Maybury actually said, right?
yeah.
But at least if you've a citation to the definitive text of Madison versus Maybury, that's a big help.
Sure, sure.
But maybe we get there. We get there someday. But I'm intrigued that after doing that, oh, you also ended up you testified to Congress, I believe, at one stage as well, didn't you?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Uh, it was basically about the reuse of legal material,
Okay.
one sort or another.
I seem to remember it was to do. Was it to do with the pacer system?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, that's exactly right. The problem with Pacer uh, was that it had not kept up with the technology, so it was pretty much always out of date.
Mm. And then there was a. I seem to remember there was a per page pricing aspect to it
Yes,
as well.
yes, there was, which was just silly. And
Because it was
the only people that Pacer ever listened to were the people at the Library of Congress.
right. And did you? I seem to remember around the time that was going on, there is a gentleman by the name of Carl Malmud
Yes,
who was
yes.
involved in all of that. You came across Carl at some point, I'm guessing.
Oh, yes. We actually met first when I was out in Mountain View, and he was down there. I think he lives somewhere in Northern California, but he was down there for a conference, including me. That was also the first time I met Tim Stanley, who runs Justia.
Um, I remember meeting Carl many, many years ago somewhere in California, and talking about the incorporation by reference. Um,
Yeah,
his thing was that he could see the reason why it would make sense, for government entities, to incorporate something like building codes from an entity whose sole
yeah,
purpose in life is to be experts in building codes.
yeah.
Um, but it does carry this freedom of access to legal materials problem becomes front and center if you do that, given that the government copyright regime doesn't extend to these private corpora created by the standards bodies.
Right, right, right.
But again, that's another one that doesn't seem to have an easy answer. Um, it's happening in all jurisdictions. I think it's like it just a natural consequence of the fact that the world is just getting more and more complicated, and it's unreasonable to expect um, anyone other than someone who's really deep in the details of, I don't know, aircraft safety or whatever it is. Uh,
Right.
it's unreasonable to expect that those people are all card carrying government employees. Those
No,
experts are going to be in the private sector, and
no,
so.
of course, of course.
um, But it's endlessly fascinating. I think that um, in all of the iterations that I've been through, which I think somewhat mirror your own. I remember Windows 3.1, and
Yeah,
I remember first looking at the tags inside the early web browsers, and seeing all of the SGML stuff that I was a little bit familiar with, and then here come the CD-ROMs, and you know, um, all of the revolutions that have happened since, and I think we're on the cusp of another one now. Um, Actually, one of the things you mentioned, your colleague that started up the LII with you,
uh,
Professor.
Peter Martin.
I remember wasn't one of his things to do with media neutral citations? Wasn't that something?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. He wanted media neutral citations, and much of his work, was actually on Social Security.
Okay.
So those regs made it in there quite quickly. Um,
Mm.
the other thing is that, uh, for maybe 3, 4 years, we published the IRS tax code on CD because nobody else would do it.
Right.
I mean, it was sort of nuts.
Right. Right. I mean, the tax code, the IRC has always intrigued me because obviously it's very large and complicated. That won't be a surprise to any. Um, but it also has this corresponding data set called the IRM, which is
Yes.
um, is it the Internal Revenue Manual? I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
But it
Yes.
in itself is a massive tome, um, which tells you how the tax folks are interpreting the IRC.
Right.
uh, it's always intrigued me that there's this weird thing that because law can be so complex in the way it's worded and the way it's constructed, that oftentimes there's a layer between human beings and the raw underlying text, which are manuals and guidance of various forms. And it's like, but every now and then, I find myself thinking, gee, well, if that's what it really means, why don't they pass that into law? Right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So tell me this, gonna switch topic on you now,
Sure.
for a second. Is through all of that stuff that you've described, did you always have an interest in music, or is that something that
Oh,
came along later?
no, well, the funny thing is, when I was, about 14, Mother Mallard's Portable Masterpiece Company, was in Ithaca. Uh, there's actually a restaurant out in Trumansburg that is the site of the former Moog factory, and in fact, there's a plaque outside it that says, "This is where the Moog modular was invented,"
Wow, right.
et cetera, et cetera. But my interest in electronic music started with, seeing Mother Mallard's Portable Masterpiece Company for 2 shows when I was about 14. One of the people in it was, Linda Fisher, who was about a year ahead of me in high school, and she had this sort of RMI electric piano, which could be a harpsichord or whatever you
Mm,
want, basically. And that was good. And since I got back to Ithaca, uh, I've been friends with David Borden, who was the founder of the thing, for a long time.
mm. So, I get that's a field of music, obviously, that's changed dramatically,
Yeah.
since the early days of, the Moog synthesizer and then the creation of the MIDI standard, which is still with us to this day in all of its
Oh,
8-bit
yeah.
history. Uh, so you lived through all of that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, nowadays, I mostly have sequencers on my iPad that control stuff, which is fun. There's this wonderful place down in Harleysville, Pennsylvania, called EMEAP, where they have an insane number of musical instruments. I mean,
Mm,
they've got Frank Zappa's road rig, they've got Jimi Hendrix's road rig, they've got Frank Zappa's kitchen table, which was painted by his wife, they've got all of Rick Wakeman's keyboards. They've got a whole bunch of stuff from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Uh,
mm,
um, I mean, and the Who. I mean, it's just
mm.
it's just a crazy place. Uh, they're they're trying to do some fundraising at this point, and I've been giving them some advice on that. Mostly, what they need to do is get together with the Philadelphia Cultural Alliance because they have access to a whole lot of grants.
Okay. I think it's really cool though that all of that stuff over all of those generations with a little bit of trickery, there's a good chance that through this crazy, 8-bit MIDI standard, there's a good chance that chunks of it will work together,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
up to and including lighting systems that get triggered by MIDI messages, and even some of the latest stuff that I've been, the stuff that I've been playing around. Because I play a thing called an EWI, an electronic wind instrument, as well as playing
I
a real
I
sax.
I I actually had one at one point.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah, I just gave it to a guy. Uh, yeah, I had a Yamaha WX5.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I never had the Yamaha WX5, but I mean, there's some of the instruments in particular. There's uh, instead of using samples, there's a thing called a SWAM engine, SWAM. I think it came out of Stanford University, I think originally, but it does remarkably good synthesis of things like violins and flutes and clarinets and stuff. And it's really, I find it very useful. But it's really, I find it interesting that, give you an example. When I moved to Kansas at one stage to work on a computer system for the legislature in Kansas, um, it didn't take us very long to figure out when we assembled the team in Topeka, Kansas. It didn't take us very long to figure out that we actually had a band. You know,
Ah.
project manager played bass. Another project manager played drums. I played guitar, and but there seemed to be this strong correlation between people who have an interest in, say, the logic of computer science, or the logic of law. Um, Maybe it's patterns. Maybe it's just because it's all, music is fundamentally patterns, and
Well, sure.
maybe
Sure.
pattern-oriented brains perhaps just gravitate towards that kind of stuff. Uh,
Yeah.
have you noticed that in your days in Cornell? Did you come across many lawyers who were also closet musicians?
Yes, actually, a number of them.
Mhm.
Uh, can't remember specific names, but there were a fair number.
Right. It's um, I think it's got to do with the just the patterned nature of things, and I also like the fact that I always law seems to me to be a hermeneutic circle, right? It's this great big, it's a set of circular references, and so there's
Yeah,
no,
that's very true.
you can't just build it up in a layer. You kind of have to look at the entire thing. You have to be constantly able to zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, and I think there's a lot of that in music as well.
Let's see. What else haven't we discussed?
I'm still intrigued. I can kind of see how, obviously if you got, you know, your way around electronics, I can see how, lighting systems obviously are electrical in nature. The bit that still uh I'm not clear on is at what point did you say, gee, programming computers looks like fun, or looks easy, or looks like something, where did that come about?
Well, as I say, I taught 2 courses in PL1 at the drama school. Uh,
Mm,
um, and then after I got back to Ithaca, I was using Borland C++ to program cello. Uh,
mm.
um,
And why did you decide? Well, I think I can guess. I mean, Borland C++ was very big in the day, as the programming language. This would have been Windows 3.1 type era. Would it have been somewhere
yeah,
around?
Borland gave up C++.
Hmm.
I think there was maybe a Windows version, but I was already done with the browser at that point.
Right.
Um, I remember at one point meeting Tim Berners-Lee in Chicago. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, he came up to see a demo of cello, and
Okay.
then later a day later, we went down to NCSA in Illinois,
Hmm.
which was the first time I met Mark Andreessen.
Okay.
Uh,
And that was the early days of Netscape, I'm guessing.
oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
I remember he made the comment once that I think that an operating system as a browser device driver, I think was his one of his one-liners.
Yeah,
Um,
apparently.
but then Microsoft went off some other way. I can't remember. I think they bought a company that had the code base for what eventually became Internet Explorer. I think.
Yes.
Um,
You know, at one point, they asked me to send them my code.
this is
Uh,
Microsoft.
yeah, uh,
Okay.
which they didn't accept, although I had written this marquee tag in the cello just that would cause stuff to spin around and so forth and so on. The funny thing about it was they actually copied that.
So you're responsible for the marquee tag.
Yes, apparently. I mean, I did it as a joke.
Wow. I did not know
Yeah.
that. Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was just sort of it was just sort of I just sort of did it for fun, you
Right,
know?
right, right. That was that one was put into the same bracket as the famous blink tag of back in the day.
Oh, yes. That which is nuts. But
It's been fantastic and very interesting talking to you. Thank you very much, Tom.
oh, you're very welcome.